it was my step uncle who actually said, will ever thought about insurance? And I went, no, what's that? But he was quite a big wig in at Sedgwick's. He looked after, some senior accounts, including people like Henry Ford and Elizabeth Taylor.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Defense Never Rests. I'm Wendy Smith here with my colleague Nate Bolander.
Morning.
Morning. And we have a great guest on today, Edmund Eastwood from Lonsdale, overseas, from London, live. Who has been a broker in the Lloyd's Syndicate for many years, started back in claims and is now with Lonsdale, and known Eddie for a really long time. He's a great guy. We just saw him a few months ago before all this COVID madness started. So I'd like to introduce Eddie.
Eddie Eastwood it is. And hello from London. I'm actually a sort of more a sort of Lloyd's broker and working in Lloyd's, and I've been there, since 1985, I think. Far too long. A bit
Those were the good days.
Far too long, but not always with Lonsdale. And my role really has. I started out initially on the claims side, and I was probably there for about 7 years. And I worked for a company called Sedgwick's, who some of you might remember. It's now part of Marsh, a much bigger company. And from there, I moved to a smaller firm called Miles Smith, but only briefly, actually. It was only about 18 months. And then Towers, or Dennis M. Clayton, which became Towers Perrin, which then became Towers Watson. Anyway, eventually I found myself at Lonsdale, where I believe I've been for about 5 or 6 years. And typically now, or after the original first 7 years, I moved over to the placing side, and I was on the professional indemnity liability side, and taking unusual risks into the market. And actually not a lot has changed. The risks are more varied, and I would say that they're sort of way more detailed than my original risks. But I've had some fun risks that I've dealt with over the years, and it's been an enjoyable time.
What kind of claims did you first start doing when you first entered the market?
Well, I started off with sort of odd ones, like I might have mentioned, the Muckleshoot Indians.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Well, they'd had a hydroelectric plant, and it was one of the first, I think, to be built in the US. And typically, the Muckleshoot Indians had used the river for salmon fishing, or catching salmon, and also growing their food on sort of fertile land. But when the hydro came along, of course, it stopped the meandering river. There wasn't a lot of water unless they let it out. And ultimately, the Muckleshoot Indians sued the hydro. I think it was Puget. Would it have been Puget Sounds, maybe? I think.
That's in the northwest there by Seattle, Washington State.
Yeah, so this is so long. It goes back to 1910, the original claim, I think. So, but by the time I got it in the 80s, it was close to settlement. And two Indians they discovered were in fact left from the original tribe. So they picked up, I think, probably over $1 million between the two of them. And
got $1 million after being in litigation since 1910.
Yes. I think the lawyers took probably the majority of it, but who knows?
There should be a record somewhere of the world's longest claim.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think some of the other ones, I mean, the ones we dealt with on the workers' compensation side, which was probably, again, a company you might recall called Stauffer Chemical.
I know what it is. It's been a long time. And I don't want to
so,
age myself either.
No,
Eddie
well,
just said he's working on a claim from 1910, so we can't get much worse than that.
It started in 1910.
I know.
Don't age Eddie.
I did say I'd hit it in about 1985.
That's right.
So, but anyway, yeah, there were a lot of cases where the longevity of these patients, or people who were suffering from the chemicals, we had to sort of pay them on a monthly basis, and it was about 7 bags of files, which I tried to get a sort of taxi, but my company was a little too mean in those days, and they wouldn't give me a taxi, so I had to do sort of like 2 or 3 shifts, and eventually, I'd make it with all these bags and get all the sort of invoices signed off, or the pills they needed for the bordereaux and attached copies thereof. And I mean, it was quite an archaic system looking back at it, but actually, it sort of gave me the idea that actually I didn't want to stay in claims with bags, having to carry these bags for years and years and years, because I felt I might end up looking like an orangutan. So I opted to move. I had a position came up, and I was asked if I wanted to go on the professional indemnity side of claims. And actually, I said, yeah, but you must remember that actually, I think my ultimate game is to be on the placing side. And my new boss said, yes, yeah, of course you'd like to do that. And I stayed with her for probably about 18 months, 2 years before I then moved on to the placing side, where I've been ever since. And
can you describe, I don't mean to cut you off, could you just describe what placing is for the folks that may not know, that we listen to the podcast?
Yeah, sure. Well, perhaps it's now Lloyd's itself actually is worth understanding how it works. So we have syndicates in Lloyd's. We've been established since 1688, and really we were a byproduct of the stock market. I feel the stock market, can go up and down, as we've seen in these times, recent times.
Mostly down, but yes.
Mostly down. I think it's recovered a bit, but but it did go down probably more than 30%, certainly in the UK, and the British government, decided that actually Lloyd's would be a good place to bring in, because typically what happens to Lloyd's is where the stock market goes down, Lloyd's actually bounces back and provides a revenue stream for quite a few of us. That is not the case at the moment. But getting back to your original question, so Lloyd's was set up as an entity, and the members of that entity are syndicates, and they're represented by underwriters. Typically like an insurer, except the only difference between an insurer and Lloyd's of London or members is the way they actually raise their capital to be able to write risk. And so the stock market would, if you were an insurer, you'd raise money through your shareholders, and you'd get that money, which would then allow you to write those risks, and perhaps gear up to be able to write more risk than even your own liquidity flow, probably until recently, or fairly recently. But with Lloyd's, we relied on members, and members would have to show £100,000, and they would select either risk or relative risk or higher risk syndicates, with the promise of getting greater yields or greater returns. And you could write, so if you showed 100,000, you could technically probably write up to 200,000. And if your return yield was above 8% or higher, then obviously that's a pretty good rate of return when you consider what's happening at the moment. You'd be lucky if you got 0.5% from a bank or something like
Right.
that. But it's not with Lloyd's. It was not without risk, and you find sort of down the history that actually there needed to be a sort of a central fund, plus another type of fund that protected, the members, protected the syndicates, and so almost like a three-tiered security system that allowed those syndicates to stay in business, or in the event of runoff, be handled by another syndicate, which would be deliberated by the Committee of Lloyd's, who would then determine what, who was going to pay what. The idea being that we never not wanted to pay a loss. And I think the earthquake of San Francisco proved that, when Kiln, the sort of the leader of that syndicate, said, we will pay every damage to properties, and any monies that we owe, Lloyd's will ensure you get paid, and our syndicate will pay you now. And that's pretty impressive. I don't think there are many organizations like that who sit firmly behind, how they feel and how they do. And so what happens is, as a broker, because I'm straying away from the point a bit, but so as a broker, I sort of Lloyd's registered broker, I get the business from a client, whether it be retail or wholesale. So in the case of retail, a doctor could come to me in the UK, and I would be their retail broker, and I would then go out to a syndicate, probably on the medical malpractice side, and ask an underwriter who was a specialist in that area to write the business. And so this works the same in the US, except the only difference is, because I'm not licensed in the US, as I'm a Lloyd's broker, I actually work as a wholesale broker. So the business is brought in either by a retail broker in the US or by a wholesale broker who's representing retailers in the US. And that business comes in, and that we look at it possibly collectively. You can do individual risks or open market risks, as they're known in Lloyd's, but typically it's done as a grouping, a group of risks, which could be either a binding authority and a line slip, or a market line slip. And that's, I'm probably going to confuse quite a few of your folk out there by saying that. So I'll attempt to say a bit more about that in a minute. But ultimately, so I'm the middleman. I take that in, and the syndicate can only write the business via a broker currently.
Through
They
you.
do have to, through me,
Okay.
or somebody like me. But they do have domestic insurers now, or their own insurance companies, some in the US, in New York. And so that they will write that business for a genre of risk that is done over there. But if it comes into Lloyd's, it has to come via a broker. And that's the way it's operated. And whether it will always operate like that, who knows? So I look at the risk and determine whether actually it's something I can do, or I do have alternatives that, I know there's great number of friends who I've made over the years, and if I can't do it, they certainly can. Is the feeling that I sort of generally impress on people that I meet who I'm not sort of sure where to go with a piece of business. And anyway, so I get the business, I look at it and evaluate the information I need, whether there's an application form that's being completed, further information, whether it be financials or the claims records, a number of issues like that. Collate that information together and then decide what we're going to do with it. Now, if it's an individual risk or open market risk, as I said earlier, we can go direct to a syndicate, and the chances are, and to the specialist underwriter, and we can probably get that written 100% stamp down by that underwriter. But if
Eddie,
it's a
when
very,
I just
say that again.
you're giving us like a lot of detail about, you know, how the brokerage works. When you were in claims originally, when you started with Sedgwick, did you have this deep knowledge or a little bit of this knowledge?
Well, in truth, not really.
And then
No,
transfer that, or did you learn this only on the brokerage side?
I had an understanding of you know, the line slips and the binding authorities and things like that. It was more, you know, I got the training. I mean, you've got to remember, we didn't even have a computer when I first joined. I had to learn that in 3 days.
That's why you had the bags of documents from 1910.
You got it. So,
And they were cloth bags, right? They didn't have plastic back then.
well, they were pretty much cloth bags, and it was just a nightmare, you know. And but I mean, in retrospect, I fell into insurance. I actually worked for a bank, the TSB, Trustee Savings Bank, on their unit trust side, and anyway, it got closed down at our operation on the unit trust, and it was my step uncle who actually said, you know, we'll ever thought about insurance? And I went, no, what's that, sort of thing. But he was quite a big wig at Sedgwick's at one time, and he looked after, you know, some senior accounts, including people like Henry Ford and Elizabeth Taylor, and I think what he knew about insurance was pretty limited. But what they gave him was a pretty decent budget to entertain these rich folk.
He entertained Elizabeth Taylor and
Oh yeah,
Henry Ford.
and Joan Collins. I met her once.
Past Dynasty days, or while she was still in?
Oh, before Dynasty, yeah. She was over in London, and it was Christmas time, just after Christmas, and I think it was the Boxing Day night, and we went round, and she was there. The young were sent upstairs, and that included Tracy and Rachel Ward, who were front page of Vogue at the time. And I think actually, no, she just made a film called Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid.
Okay.
And
That's Nate's favorite.
No. What year are we talking, Eddie?
Oh my God, that might be 1986 or something.
Okay, so I was 3, so I don't really remember that.
Well, the Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid was about James Cagney, and James Cagney, they were honouring the old timers. And anyway, all these sort of actresses, including Joan Collins, got together, and it was quite something. I'd never seen anything like it in my entire life. You know, I came from a sort of farming background where it was pretty sleepy in our countries, out of the way place.
And Lloyd's syndicates, they would get this budget to entertain these.
Yeah, I think at the time his budget was, you know, a couple of £100,000 a year to get these people to come through the door, and that included, you know, I think some other ones. I mean, he's now dead, but that would include, you know, people like Rupert Murdoch. And I think he put the deal together for Sotheby's New York and got their insurance, but didn't get a fee for putting the deal together between London and New York, which is pretty impressive, you know. And I suspect he had quite a few stories to tell, you know, but sadly we can't hear them now. But
was Joan Collins the rope that got you in to stay in insurance?
Say that again.
I said, was Joan Collins sort of the rope to keep you in the insurance industry after that?
Well, yeah, it seemed like quite a glamorous place, but actually, on reflection, that's rubbish, isn't it, really, for the most part?
I would stay in the insurance industry if I got to hang out with Joan Collins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, The trouble
Even
is
like
most,
a part B actor, so I don't know what they call them.
B
You were on The
B list.
Bachelor, you were a contestant. I'll hang out with you.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, well, unfortunately, my clientele isn't quite the same as that, but I wish it were.
Yeah.
Well, what kind of
Yeah.
risk were you writing for, or was the syndicate writing for those folks? I mean, when you want to get them in the door, what kind of things were you?
Well, I think, I mean, I suppose it was to do with her voice, or she got ill.
Mhm.
I mean, Marilyn Monroe, Lloyd's actually insured her legs, for example. But
Didn't they do that
uh,
with David Beckham too? They insured Beckham's legs for many
yeah,
years.
I
Yeah.
think you think you're right. They did, and you know, and she was sort of quite a big star, and you know, if she couldn't be on set, or it was going to cost somebody quite a lot of money to try and sort it out, uh, and but it's amazing. It amazes me what you can get insured if you put your mind to it, and that's why Lloyd's is very good at it. You know, they've always had that quirky side. It's probably how they've survived, because they just, you know, they just come up with something new and say, yeah, we'll do that, you know, without probably all the sort of analytical side that you probably now need to do things, and a lot of the risks you get now are probably fairly straightforward genre stuff, and allows you know, a computer technically to take it all out off your hands. And with algorithms, you know, which are, I mean, they're just so far removed from, from what I first discovered.
Do you think that takes the personal element away a little bit?
I think it does. I mean, because insurance for me has always been a people's business. You know, you get more done in the past with a glass of wine, an underwriter will sign. Whereas now, you know, the syndicates, they won't do anything unless it's at the bots or through their process, and obviously that personal side is much more difficult. I'm just relying on the old faces that I know from years gone by to get things done. But their appetite for business and their professionalism now is probably far greater than it ever was before, and that's, you know, that's got to be good news. And our accounting system's a lot better. You know, we did struggle through reconstruction and renewal, and it's just, it's progress, I suspect.
I have a question for you. So when I first started doing some Lloyd's work years ago, and I think I was saying this to you the last time we were in London, I just remember there was a lot more syndicates as part of Lloyd's. And somebody told me when I was there that now there's under 40, and the number shrunk a lot. Why is that?
It's to do really with the amalgamation or mergers, because the way perhaps our regulatory authority runs, you know, that we've, because of reconstruction and renewal, and the subsequent bad years for Lloyd's, you need to show more liquidity, and the only way to do that, as probably is happening in quite a lot of industries, is to merge and create yourself as the biggest and best, largest syndicate in the world, you know, with hundreds of billions available. And for every sort of pound that comes in or dollar that comes in, you know, you have to match it. And I mean, we've got our own trusts in the US, which are negotiated annually, you know, in places like Kentucky and Illinois, and their requirements, their regulatory requirements are now much bigger than what it was a few years ago, and so therefore those small syndicates can't really cope with the sort of numbers that are required in order to transact business. However, having said that, we do now have a sort of a pop-up of things like MGAs, managing general agents, which can write on behalf of a syndicate, but their parameters are set, you know, annually. And I think the other thing is that you've got to remember that Lloyd's is also reinsured. And I think it's also a requirement by reinsurers. So you think of the big ones in Europe, like Swiss Re or Munich Re. They are really big entities in their own right, and probably larger than Lloyd's itself. And they reinsure quite a lot of the syndicates within Lloyd's. So the $5 billion losses that are currently out there in Lloyd's, that's what they're talking about, it could easily be 80-90% reinsured. And I think it's just, our Lloyd's is going like our stock market did a few years ago, where there was a massive contraction and you just get, a few really big players controlling the amount of money that's being invested through them. And it's not like individual members now investing. It's
large companies,
it's hedge funds. It's a whole range of very high net worth companies that are beginning to sort of say, right, you got to get bigger, and looking for proper returns. And the cost of having a structure like that, you've got to put in place a pretty decent legal, in-house legal. You've got to have auditors. You've got to update your IT systems regularly, and it's just it's just more difficult for a smaller syndicate to be able to survive that with the level of investment that's actually required.
Do you think
that's why
it's going to be worse now post-COVID?
Well, it's going to get interesting because of COVID. I mean, there's a lot of people who feel, or some syndicates who are saying, they don't think they should pay out on. But and again, the FCA, the regulatory body, I believe, has taken a case or several cases as a trial to court to try and establish, the onus and the responsibility of what these wordings will actually mean. And there's a few quite big syndicates in Lloyd's that have been named, and not quite shamed yet, but are sort of saying, well, actually, some of our policies we don't think should respond, but they're trying to get, a blanket they're trying to get a blanket of arbitration, if you like, across Lloyd's, that regardless of almost of the wordings, and actually say you will pay. I mean, that's their plan. That's what I think but that's what a regulatory body is there for, isn't it? It's ultimately it's trying to look after the insureds. And sometimes, not always respecting what the insurers have actually negotiated between their insureds. And I mean, typically individual things like business interruption are potentially massive losses to the industry. And it's not just Lloyd's, it's across the world. I think that figure we've been quoted over here is 200 billion across the world. It's huge sums of money, and it's going to take a time to recover from a shock like that. But if we're reinsured, who are the reinsurers, and some of them are in Europe, so they're going to get hit very badly.
I explained that to somebody years ago. Someone asked me what reinsurance was. I used to do that for a very short stint, and I was like, just think of it this way: it's insurance for insurance companies for insurance companies. And I always say, I think the guy at the very end goes bankrupt.
Yeah, well, pretty much.
But it is.
I think it is a bit like that. But if you get a ruling from the FCA from our sort of courts over here that tells the insurer or under syndicate that they've got to rip up their bit of paper, they go to their reinsurers and say, well, we have got losses coming in. We didn't expect them, but we've now got them. And the reinsurance company says, well, we're not going to pay them because that's not what we agreed to reinsure. And then you have a sort of domino effect. So everybody sues each other. And and it then becomes very messy. I guess you guys do well then.
Well, we unintended consequences. No one ever wants to call an attorney until they want to call an attorney. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but no, one of the questions I was going to ask Eddie was, you sent me that article on this FCA with respect to one of the syndicates, and my question was going to be, how can there be a blanket ruling for all business interruption claims across Lloyd's when, like you just said, there's individual negotiations between an insurance company and insurer, right?
Well, I personally don't think there can be, and I think the FCA might be overstepping the mark on that one, as any regulatory body, because who are they? Are they really representing the insureds, and are they representing how many insureds are they representing, and where did they get this information? And I think it's for me, it's a feeling that the FCA feel as if they need to be doing something, and this is what they've come up with. Now, whether that's right or wrong, who knows? But in terms of, are they truly representing the insured? I don't think they are, is the honest answer.
And just for the viewers that don't know, what is the FCA and kind of what do they do in just a sentence or two?
Financial Conduct Authority, and they are the Financial Conduct Authority for the Lloyd's and insurance industry. You've got something called the PRA as well, which is Prudential Regulatory Authority, and they deal with the monies, the actual liquidity of monies. But this is FCA is set up really for sort of anti-money laundering. Have you done your KYC, know your client? Have you done all your checks and balances to make sure that that there's going to be no fraud involved? And if there is, they can investigate you and stop you working for until it goes to trial, until you're proven innocent or guilty. I mean, so you're guilty unless you can prove your innocence.
So there's a governmental body ensuring compliance in the insurance industry.
Yeah, and so they're paid for by the government, and so that would be, I suppose, you're equivalent to the SEC, right? That's exactly Securities Exchange Commission. Their role is identical, sort of to the SEC.
It used to be interesting if there's a blanket statement that all business interruption claims must be covered for a certain period. It's kind of antithetical to the right of private contract, right? In the different insurance policies, there's different language, and this is kind of taking that out and saying everything must be covered.
Absolutely, and has it there's a word sort of flying about. Has it got communicable disease in the wording? And when you took out your business interruption, did you take a very basic form of business interruption, or did you go for the full blown business interruption? And that's what I think there'll be arguments over. And was it really there to pick up COVID-19? And arguably there's going to be a lot of policies where it didn't do that. I do know, sort of, we've actually got something on which we should have been watching, called Wimbledon. And Wimbledon have had to stop. They can't play, and even if Djokovic was allowed to play, he's actually got COVID-19 anyway. Yep. He had a tennis tournament with a bunch of mates, and probably gave them all, or everybody caught the virus. It's not great.
No,
but Wimbledon, I know, was cancelled, and that would be like a contingent. It wouldn't be under the heading business interruption, but it'd be under contingency. So because it never took place, they would get paid back for the bums on seats, if you like. But not all contingency policies necessarily pay for your venue or your festival or your tennis tournament or to be covered. unless you've specifically taken out uh, notifiable diseases as an exclusion within your policy. And that I think is a good example of what could be used regarding the business interruption. You know, it's a very similar thing. You know, if you offered it, what were you really offering? And if they didn't accept it, why should you cover it? Your insured didn't accept it. Why?
Right.
So Eddie, let's go back to you and like how you got started. When you talked about how you got started in this industry, you know, looking at today, do you think that the Lloyd's market syndicates, do you think that this is a very attractive industry for young people?
I think it is more so than it was actually even in my day. I mean, I just remember, you know, when in my youth being at a dinner party with some gorgeous looking sort of young ladies around the table and a bunch of us men, every one of which was a banker, apart from myself, who was an insurance broker. And hardly any of the girls wanted to talk to me. Whereas, because I was in insurance, whereas now, you know, a lot of the very clever young sort of kids that are coming out, and don't forget, you know, you've also got to look, it was quite a male orientated, you know, there were very few ladies in Lloyd's, you know, one or two, not very many. Whereas now it's almost 50-50. I mean, there's still probably a few more male and men in it, but those individuals that join now seem to be incredibly bright. You know, they've gone to some of our top universities, you know, Cambridge or Oxford, and if not, there's some pretty good universities where they've got some highly qualified degrees, which in my day, of course, you didn't really need too much of that. And you know, and I think actually they're interesting characters in their own right, and they've got, you know, they've made the job much more sort of involved and complicated. And also, you know, there is a degree of understanding of insurance. People know about insurance, but they don't know what some of these individuals are actually doing on not things like necessarily cars or sort of thing, or you know, your average property, residential property that needs cover. They're actually out there, you know, looking at satellites, robotics, and I think for the young, you know, actually one good thing about insurance, what you see about it is you actually see a range of different businesses that people are getting up to, which you wouldn't see in normal life. And I've seen it myself. You know, I've looked at. Do you remember Cirque du Soleil?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was a company, I think, back in the day called Cineplus that did the architecture, and they did Disney, you know, rides. I think they were involved with the boat that goes up and down. Well, you tell me another job where you'd see anything like that. You just wouldn't see it, and I, you know, I take a lot of pleasure in that, or some of the scientific stuff that's coming through. I mean, I can remember another one that I looked at called Cochlear, which allowed deaf people to hear. And it gave me quite a buzz that I could, to excuse the pun, that that I could get that insured in Lloyd's. And when I spoke about it, you know, to a number of friends, they said, well, no, I've never heard of that. It's rubbish. And I said, you wait, it will come to this country. And it has. And that's what I say, you know, that people tend to look at jobs, and it doesn't matter whether it's insurance, and they say, oh, most of it's boring. But actually, there are some good sides to it. And you meet a lot. Well, in my day, I've met a lot of great mates, and it's a people's business. And it's not just about being at the end of a phone or remotely doing things. It's actually getting out there and meeting people, cosmopolitan people, and shooting the breeze with them and saying, what do you think about this? Or where do you think I could get that covered? And that's the fun side of it. And we all of us, to a man or woman in insurance, I think says, oh God, there must be a better job out there somewhere. I wish I was doing what they were doing. But actually, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And I can only say from personal experience, I don't regret what I did, even by just falling into it by mistake.
A lot of us get jobs.
And also, I think that there's a movement. You know, I was offered I've been offered a risk management role, and so there is a variation of insurance, and I think insurance can lead you to other things if you want it. It's not, I wouldn't give up my day job, but it can give you other sort of forms of looking at things which you thought, well, in the past I wouldn't have considered, but because you've got some experience, I guess people do want you. Yeah, I hope that answers the question, but
it does.
Absolutely.
I think we're going to wrap things up. Giving us, I mean, we could talk for days. I know.
Well, we will when you come over. I'll let you get a word in edgeways.
But do you guys, Dave, Eddie, do you guys have any last comments? Or?
No, I really thank you, Eddie, and we'll come back. We'll meet the Crutch Friars again and go have some Indian food. We'll do round 2, you know. Thanks again,
Thank
Eddie.
you.
This is great.
Great speaking to you.
Eddie, good to see you.